So we have a couple of aims today. And as I mentioned to you during the session last week, when we were putting together the training, we took the list of competencies that have been developed by all of the review of all the literature and through interviews with individuals working in the justice system and individuals with lived experience from across the United States, Canada, and Australia and the UK. And we've come up with a list of competencies in terms of information that we think is important for you to know. And I'll also share that one of our aims in doing the questionnaire survey at the end is for you to also share with us, if there are things that we're missing and things that need to be added to the training, and also things that you feel are less relevant. So in terms of our aims for today, we're going to just have a quick refresher from session one. As mentioned, I'm going to introduce you to the Inner City Family Health Team and OBIA, for short, Ontario Brain Injury Association. I'm going to walk through the screening measure with you, which is the tool is called the HELPS. That's an acronym, and it is the measure that is being implemented now at John Howard Society Toronto, so that all clients, new clients coming in, will participate with, of course, with their consent in that screening. We're also going to talk about communication after brain injury. We know that there are a number of challenges that people experience in their communication abilities after brain injury, and that impacts them all across the justice system as well as community reintegration. And then we're going to talk about strategies to support and facilitate. We're also going to spend quite a bit of time talking about understanding and expressing emotion after brain injury, dealing with anger and impulse control. And then we're going to touch on caregiver burden and taking care of yourselves, because we also recognize that you have very stressful jobs and it's important for you to be able to take care of yourselves as well. And then finally, we're going to share some more resources and wrap up. So in terms of just a quick refresher from session one, just a reminder that acquired brain injury is an umbrella term, and that it includes both traumatic brain injury and non-traumatic brain injury, and that injury severity can range from a mild concussion to a moderate or severe injury. And we know that mild is not always mild, and we know that moderate severe injury in of itself isn't necessarily the sole predictor of how a person is able to do. We also know that while most people recover fully from one concussion and sometimes from 2 or 3 concussions, we do know that repeat concussions, so repeat hits to the head, repeat hit to the neck, face, attempted strangulation, falls with impact, being slammed against a wall, all of those things sadly can and often do result in long-term very serious consequences. And we do understand that a number of your clients may not have had an actual severe brain injury. Some of them certainly have. Many of them have experienced repeat injuries across their lifespan. So the other very important point is that people do not need to lose consciousness for a concussion to occur. And even amongst your clients, there may be some misperception that, oh, I didn't lose consciousness, so I really didn't think it was a brain injury. The next point, again, is that we now consider traumatic brain injury, particularly a moderate, severe, or repeat concussions with persistent symptoms, to be a chronic disease or a chronic disability. And it has long-term, lifelong consequences that can evolve and often do evolve over time. We also know, sadly, that violence is both a cause of traumatic brain injury and it's also a result of traumatic brain injury, and in some cases, not all. And as we mentioned last time, injury severity is not the only predictor of outcome, which is a good thing. We know that early identification, proper diagnosis, family, supportive family, social and rehabilitative support can enable people with brain injuries to lead very meaningful lives. And again, that is why we're doing the training, and even more importantly, why we put this network together, so that hopefully your clients can be provided with the social supports and the rehabilitative support that they need. We also know, sadly, that people with brain injury or suspected brain injuries are unfortunately very overrepresented among people who are experiencing marginalization. Those who experience poverty, unstably housed or homeless, those involved in the criminal justice system. Of course, we know there's often comorbidities, co-occurrence with mental health and substance use concerns, women survivors of intimate partner violence. And interestingly, there was a study from the United States. I don't have data from Canada here, but older African Americans in poverty and young white males in poverty in the United States have the highest prevalence. So we also know that brain injury is often accompanied by changes or challenges in a number of domains, and primarily in thinking and cognition, and this impacts many things, behavior. And usually what's important, and we're going to talk more about this as we go through today, the challenging behaviors associated with traumatic brain injury are not willful. People are not choosing to participate in or engage in these behaviors. It's a result of the underlying cognitive challenges, communication challenges, and emotional and psychological challenges. So I think that's a really important point, because often these are misinterpreted. We also see challenges with communication, as I mentioned, and these other issues, again, which are extremely important and also highly prevalent. And I know that for the majority of your clients, you're dealing often with all of these and interplay of all of these. Excuse me. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nadia, and she's going to spend a few minutes talking to you about the Inner City Family Health Team, what they offer, who they are, and again, how you can reach out to them and their role in the network. So welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction, and we're really excited to be a part of this partnership. So I'll just give you a brief kind of history of who we are. So we actually started off as a very small primary care clinic inside of Seton House. And then in 2010, we were granted the title of becoming a family health team. And that's when we moved out of Seton House and to our location where we're at now at 69 Queen Street East. So we're located right across from St. Michael's Hospital in the core of the downtown East. Up until recently, we were primarily serving people that had a connection with Seton House, but we're happy to say that in the summer of last year, we worked with the Ministry of Health to expand our mandate. And so now we are able to serve anyone who has experienced homelessness at any point in their life, or they're precariously housed and living in Toronto, and we can accept referrals from all across the city. So that's really helped us expand the population of homeless and previously homeless individuals in our community. When somebody gets connected with us, we not only provide them with their primary care services through a family doctor or a nurse practitioner, but we have a range of wraparound services to help provide the interdisciplinary support that often, with the complexities of the clients that we serve, to help them with the issues that they need. So we can, once a person gets connected with our clinic, so like I was saying, we will set them up with a primary care physician or a nurse practitioner. So we have 5 part-time physicians, and that is offered through a partnership we have with the Inner City Health Associates, and 1 nurse practitioner that is part of the family health team. And I won't go through all of the services that we are able to provide somebody once they get connected to us, but they're all listed there. One thing I did leave off of there is that we also have access to a psychiatrist and a team of psychologists. So that is particularly beneficial for your clients that would have a brain injury. So just to clarify, when a client is referred to us, it's usually someone who is not already connected to a primary care doctor in the community. or they're not securely connected to a primary care physician, and they can transfer their care over to us and then receive the wraparound supports as well. So one of the benefits of connecting with our team is that we do have the access to psychiatry services, and our clients can often get a referral and assessment through psychiatry more quickly than they would through a community referral. So that's really helpful, particularly for people who do have an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury. To connect with us, you just have to give us a call. We're working on developing a referral form to help streamline the referral process of getting clients connected. And usually once we get a referral, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks, just depending on how backlogged we are. We are a little bit backlogged due to the shutdown of COVID earlier this year. But we're accepting clients for initial intakes with the doctor around the end of November, which is a lot quicker than some other clinics in the city. So we're happy to say that we can serve people quite rapidly through our clinic. Once we have our referral form developed and finalized, I can definitely get that out to Catherine, and maybe she could share it with all of you. And that would be a great way. You just have to fax it in, fill out the information, fax it to us, and we'll take care of the rest in terms of setting up a client intake. But until we get that form out, you can refer clients just by giving our clinic a call and letting our receptionists know that you're just calling to set up an initial appointment for a new client. If you have any questions about our services, what we do, how we work, please feel free to email me. I've put my email on the slide there. You can take it down, send me a message, or you can give our clinic a call, and any of our staff would be more than happy to help you out.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate that. And just to let you know, after we finish up today, early next week, we'll be sending out to everyone who's participated a list of all the resources that we've spoken about across the training. And of course, the contact information for the Inner City Family Health team will be part of that. It will also be on the referral network overview, sort of the model that we prepared for you. So thank you so much. And are there any immediate questions or comments for Nazia while we've got her here? I know she'd be more than happy to speak with anyone after the fact, but does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay, well, Nazia, thank you so much. Again, we're really, really pleased to be working with you, and thank you. All right, now at this point, I'm going to turn you over to Lauren. So I'm going to stop the share, and Lauren, I know that you were going to share your slides directly. So Madison, can you allow Lauren to share hers? Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today and for taking the time to learn a little bit more about brain injury. When thinking about our two organizations, I really see a lot of similarities in our goals, and particularly that's regarding integration into the community. So today I just want to share a little bit about what we do, who we are, and how together we can support individuals living with a brain injury that you might be working with. So the Ontario Brain Injury Association has been supporting people living with a brain injury for 30 years. And our main tenets are education, awareness, and support. We are the provincial organization, but we also have 21 local associations across Ontario. And I believe you heard from Melissa from Brain Injury Society of Toronto a couple days ago, and that is one of our 21 local associations. So the one thing with brain injury that's, I think, really important to remember, and we see this firsthand, are the devastation and losses that can happen following a brain injury. Brain injuries often go misdiagnosed or they're undiagnosed, and they're often very much misunderstood in healthcare as well as just the general public. In many cases, the injuries are invisible and the survivors are suffering in silence, and they often don't even know they have the brain injury themselves. And because of this, and the fact that they're invisible, many people fall through the cracks of our system and often land in our criminal justice system and as your clients. So OBIA has several support services, and the need for supporting people with a brain injury is quite significant. And our goal is to help everyone, as many people as possible with a brain injury and their families, receive the support and services they need so that they can have high quality life and good quality rehabilitation and care and recovery. So over the years, we've received close to 100,000 calls on our helpline, which I'll talk a little bit more about our specific services. Some of the people that call, I would say a significant number of people that we do have call have been a part of the criminal justice system in one way or another, whether they've been arrested or on parole or currently in prison themselves. So I'm just going to share a couple stories of clients that we have had in the past. Their names have been changed for confidentiality purposes. The first is Patrick. So Patrick was 35 years old when he first reached out to us following his brain injury. He sustained his brain injury in a motor vehicle collision. And following that, this was in 2016, following that, his life changed drastically. So prior to his injury, he was married. He had a 14-year-old son. He was very strong socially. He had good relationships with his family and friends. And he was working full-time as a social service worker with youth in his community. However, less than a year after his brain injury, his marriage had broken down. And he was unable to coordinate appointments on his own for medical care and other services. He struggled with poor memory, impulsivity, chronic pain, emotional dysregulation, poor money management, and many other problems. And as many of you can, I'm sure, imagine, with all of the challenges he was experiencing, he was also experiencing anxiety and depression from all of these challenges. So he was referred to our Northeastern Advocacy Network, a program by a court advisor. And this program is based out of North Bay, but our staff up there service all of Northeastern Ontario, stretching from Cochrane, Timmins down to Sault Ste. Marie. And the reason he was advised here was because of an altercation with his father, who was also his landlord. So our staff worked with him on several levels. The first thing she did was she worked with his criminal lawyer to help educate the lawyer about brain injury and how to work with Patrick in a positive way. So the lawyer had very, very little experience with brain injury that he was aware of in the past, and he didn't quite know how to work with him properly. So she helped him and attended meetings with him, with the lawyer, just to help navigate that system with him. It was a long process, but in the end, the judge acknowledged that the criminal justice system is, in the judge's words, set up for someone with a fully functioning brain, and sympathized with Patrick. So the judge really understood how much his life had changed from his brain injury and sympathized with that. And as a result, he was given 2 years of probation, and an agreement was made with the conditional discharge if he had no further involvement with the law during this time frame. So our staff in the Northeast attended his appointments with him, with a probation officer who also had minimal knowledge about brain injury and how to work with him. So she helped the probation officer work with him in a positive way. We were able to provide ideas such as consistent scheduling and following an itinerary for each of his meetings to stay on track and meet the obligations of his parole. And all of the while this was going on, they were also working hard and put in an application for the Hamilton Health Science Acquired Brain Injury Program, where he was eventually admitted. So throughout this time, our staff in the Northeast worked closely with his family physician, his personal injury lawyer, his criminal lawyer, as I mentioned, a community housing worker, an Ontario disability support worker, a power of attorney, and the probation officer, as well as several other people along the way, just to help him get to where he is today. So that's Patrick. And the second example I have is Robert. So Robert was injured when he was 10 years old in a motor vehicle collision as well. He was in the backseat of the car and the car rolled over. He was the most seriously injured in the car. And his heart stopped. He sustained serious head injuries and by all accounts, unfortunately, was dead. However, he was resuscitated, transported to a hospital in Toronto, and he was in a coma for a couple of weeks while he was there. When he came out of the coma, now granted, this was many years ago. I believe this gentleman Robert is now in his 60s. When he came out of his coma, he was transferred to the local hospital, which is in not Northern Ontario, but not near a dense city population. And when he was deemed well enough, he was sent home with his family with instructions from the doctor that as long as he didn't hit his head again, he'd be fine. So following the brain injury, he had immediate personality changes. He was no longer an easygoing kid that was doing well in school. He was not a good student. He had trouble with his friends. He couldn't sit still in class. And he couldn't concentrate. So he frequently got into fights as well. He failed grade 7. And when he became too troublesome at the school, he was transferred to a reform school. Robert has said that his family had no idea that the injuries and the severity of the injuries he sustained when he was 10, and they didn't know that he had a brain injury. And they weren't told that there was potential personality changes because of the brain injury. So his problems didn't end with school. He got into trouble with the law, and for many years he was in and out of jail. So for 20 years he was in and out of jail. His crimes were varied, but all the sentences were under 2 years. So he stayed in a provincial institution. In order to cope, he did depend on drugs and alcohol. And in between jail stints, Robert did look for a job. However, because of the challenges he experienced with his brain injury, he wasn't able to follow direction. And due to impulsivity, he would get into fights as well. So he was let go from many of these jobs. After about 27 years after his injury, he was finally diagnosed with a brain injury from that incident. And all of those years, he had no idea. And he truly feels that if he had known that his life would have been very, very different, and he would have had more supports and services that could have helped him lead a very, very different life from what he has now. Robert still struggles with his anger and impulsivity. And one of the only ways he can find a release is through punching something. It used to be the wall, but now it is a punching bag in his basement. He self-medicates by smoking marijuana. And his anger issues, memory issues, and impulsivity issues have caused him problems in many areas, including his ODSP. So his local ODSP office has a restraining order against him because of his harassing phone calls. And that being said, through everything, he has not given up his support with us. So he still continues to call us weekly, and we chat with him weekly about what's been going on. And we really just sit and be a supportive ear to help him manage everything. So he carries a lot of resentment for everything he's been through in his life, not knowing that he had a brain injury, the lack of support he received, and just how if he had known, he does feel that his life would have ended up differently. So each week our helpline does listen to Robert and chat with him and just check in to see how things are going. So those are a couple of examples of the type of work that we do with our clients. However, there is quite a bit more that we offer. So our 1-800 helpline provides a listening and emotional support for individuals with a brain injury, as well as family members and friends. So it's not just limited to survivors of brain injury or individuals experiencing concussion. We do open it up to anybody who has any involvement or question about brain injury or concussion. Since it started, we've had over 100,000 calls, and this year alone, Since January, we have received incoming over 2,000 calls and emails. And we provide listening and emotional support to discuss the difficulties and frustrations that can co-occur with a brain injury. And we try to empower the caller, whomever it may be, to cope with these difficulties. So we support families, friends, workers, as well as professionals. We have actually had calls from roommates or co-workers of an individual. If they have questions about somebody, they will call and ask us as well, and we really encourage that. So we would be very happy to speak with anyone from John Howard if you'd like to call. Just if you have a few questions, please feel free to give us a call. The number is here on the screen. It's right now during COVID, our hours have shifted. Usually it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Right now it is 9:30 till 4 for the time being, but someone is always there to answer as much as possible. And you can also email us as well. So the callers discuss issues and feelings across the board of everything that they might struggle with. But the main concerns that we have are problems coping with a brain injury, loneliness and isolation are big factors. And the fact that it's an invisible disability and they just don't feel that people understand. They think that they are lazy or rude or just a bad person because they can't see that they have this injury, and that's not the case, and they really feel judged because of that. And a lot of people will just call for information of, I had this injury, do I have a concussion, or what would I be experiencing? What do we recommend to do? Which we obviously always recommend that they go see their doctor, but we can provide them some information as well. And then we have we can offer caregiver supports as well. So one thing we do with our helpline is we help connect people to community referrals. So this can be different clinics in the area or rehab professionals, support programs, anything like that. But it also is legal services, community support specialist appointments, food banks, and everything in between. We really work hard to kind of cover everything that we can. If there's education, I previously worked on the helpline, and I supported a young girl who sustained a brain injury when she was quite young. I went in with the mom to the school for a meeting as we worked through her IEP. She was getting ready to go to high school, and it was just kind of making adjustments so that the parents and the school felt confident going forward that she was going to receive the best support possible in the school. And personal advocacy is a big thing for people with brain injuries. So we can assist people with income support programs, ODSP appeals, CPP appeals, issues with WSIB, and criminal injuries compensation board, where possible. Sometimes we aren't always able to help, but we do what we can. And if we're not able to help and our hands are tied, then we are always there just to be a supportive listening ear and to help them kind of navigate their way through it as much as we can. So our Northeastern Advocacy Program is the one program that I mentioned earlier with Patrick. So it was a pilot project, and we have a staff member on the ground. She works out of the hospital in the area, and she assists with crisis issues as well as ongoing needs that people may have. So her work entails everything that our helpline does in person. Right now it's a little bit changed for COVID purposes, but we're navigating our way through that. But she also will attend court with a client if need be. She can address housing issues, financial issues. She attends a lot of appointments with people. Really anything they need, if they've fallen through the cracks, she's there to help support them through that. Our emotional support across all of our programs is a big thing for us. Through the whole process, we want to be providing emotional support to our clients and their families. So we do that on the phone as much as possible. If we get emails on our helpline and we're concerned, we will ask if we can call them if our staff up in the Northeast is struggling, has a client who's struggling. She'll reach out to them and talk to them sometimes for an hour on the phone if that's what they need. Another one of the programs we have is the peer support program. So this program connects an individual with experience with acquired brain injury and as a mentor with a partner. And the partner is someone who might be new to brain injury, or they're needing support from someone who's truly been there. So we try to match people with similar experiences, education, gender. Across the board, we try to make a match based on best fit so that they can have someone who truly understands what they're going through, has been there, and they can better empathize with them about how their life has changed. And we want them to be able to understand the challenges that they're going through, whether it's a family-based challenge or education, work-wise. We try to make that match. So the matches are across Ontario. We work with our local associations to coordinate this program. So someone in Windsor may be matched with somebody in Ottawa if their criteria show that they're the best fit. And that program is also open to family members and caregivers as well, not just individuals with a brain injury. The partners speak once per week for about an hour over the phone, and the partnerships last 1 year. Each mentor is screened and provided training. And at the end of the 1 year term, if the partner feels they still need support, they will be switched to another mentor. And some of our mentors do have multiple partners at a time. They feel it's very beneficial for their own well-being to participate in this program. So right now, which is great, given COVID, we have the highest number of matches we've ever had at 192 matches, which is fantastic. And I believe in total, it's just shy of about 300 people total that are, just around 300 people total that are participating in the program, but we're always looking to expand it. So if you have anybody you think would be interested, please definitely let us know. So our online concussion support group was developed 2 years ago and has been really successful. So we noticed a few years ago, the number of calls on the helpline we were getting for concussion just absolutely skyrocketed, and they've been increasing steadily over the last few years. There's a lot more awareness about concussion out there, particularly with sports, but elsewhere as well. People are realizing that it's not just a kick to the head in a soccer game that can cause a concussion, but it can be, I just slipped and fell on the concrete outside. So this concussion support group is supposed to be a safe place where people can share their frustrations and struggles and connect with others who have had similar experiences. So we have a registered social worker named Vijaya. She facilitates the groups. And at any given point in time, she has about 5 groups. Each group is closed, so it's the same group of people each week. And there's about 8 to 10 people in the group. And each week she will talk about a different strategy to help manage challenges following a brain injury. And then the individuals in the group have an opportunity to share with each other about what they've been going through and talk and learn that strategy. So it's been really great. So our goal for this group when we first started it was to, I believe, hit 240 participants over 3 years. And we are almost done. We're about 2.5 years in, and we have well over 400 participants that we have helped so far. So it really shows the demand is out there and the need is out there. So we're really hoping to continue this program in the future. So in addition to the groups, Vijaya also does provide one-on-one support to her group members during the program, and then sometimes outside, like ongoing after their term has ended. So each program runs for 8 weeks. And then we have piloted recently a cognitive behavioral therapy group that she's been running that focuses on strategies for anxiety and depression. So those are people who have already participated in the group before that are coming back for some additional support, because that was one thing we did find, is that they finished the group, but they weren't able to come back and take it again. We needed to have new people, but then they would finish the group and they're like, well, what do I do now? So we did pilot this, this anxiety and depression group, which has been really successful as well. So how OBIA can help. So you are free to call our helpline for support anytime if you have any questions, and please connect your clients to us. If you are connected with their families, please feel free to have them reach out. We do have a caregiver support group as well, which started over the summer after a pilot period, and that is a very similar concept to the concussion support group, but it's designed for caregivers. And each group is for a different type of family member. So if you're a parent whose child has sustained a concussion, you're going to be in a different group than a wife or a spouse whose spouse has sustained a brain injury. So we do try to keep it different because you do have different experiences and challenges. And then we have our online resource, which is Caregiving After Brain Injury. And that's a website. It's caregiverinfo.ca. And there's a lot of really great information and resources you can give out to your clients and their families, and even for yourself to look on there as well. Excuse me. We continue to work with clients who are involved with criminal justice system. Right now, we have a gentleman whose part of his parole is to be educated about brain injury. He sustained a brain injury when he was quite young, and part of his parole is to be educated, which is great. So we've been working very closely with him to get him that education. If you are interested in learning more about brain injury, we do have several education programs. One is our Brain Basics program, which is actually being updated and will, fingers crossed, be released at the end of November with a brand new facelift. So it's being brought up to this century, which is excellent. So it's almost ready to go. And then we have our certificate training programs that run in collaboration with Brock University as well. And the level 1 will be offered virtually this year because of COVID, but we're also really excited about that because it's going to increase the accessibility for people who haven't been able to come before because you had to come to St. Catharines. So we're hoping for a really great turnout for that as well. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, please feel free to let us know, call the helpline, feel free to email me. And thank you so much for having me.
So again, Lauren, thank you so very much. So as part of this program of work that we're doing is that John Howard Society Toronto will be, and hopefully has started for the people that have already gone through the training, implementing a routine screening process for traumatic brain injury so that all new clients and certainly existing clients could be screened for history of brain injury. So the specific details of who's going to be conducting the screening and at which point in the intake, that of course will be communicated to you by Amber and the managers, but I know that it has been discussed and is in the process of being implemented. So if you have any questions about that, again, I suggest that you reach out to Amber. So the screening tool that we have chosen to implement is called the Helps. And we've chosen that because that is what is being used across the province. There are other more comprehensive tools, but because that's already being utilized, we felt that for consistency, that would be the most appropriate thing. So there's a couple of things that, of course, need to be considered when you're going through screening. Again, knowing that many of your clients do have a history of trauma, and there could be a stigma associated with yet having another label. So first of all, you want to consider, does your client have any awareness that they may have a brain injury? So it may be obvious to you, or even by things that they've said, it may not necessarily be obvious for them. And I think that very, very sad story that Lauren shared about Robert is just such a tragic example. Now, certainly at this point in people's lives, we're much more aware, and people are more likely to have been diagnosed. But we do know that there are a lot of people walking around out there who really have no idea that they have had a brain injury. So you want to consider, might this be a shock for them? Secondly, does your client come from a cultural background where this information might be distressing or difficult to acknowledge? Do they come from a culture where illness is not acknowledged? It's considered to be a sign of weakness. So those are all things, of course, that you need to consider. Very importantly, has your client experienced early childhood trauma, trauma as an adult? Have they experienced violence? Might the screening questions cause some distress for them and bring up some challenging memories? So again, all of these things do need to be handled with care and caution. And then, of course, the comment that I made earlier about, whether or not your client might perceive stigma about brain injury. And we talk a lot about this, with individuals with such experience and with frontline staff and caregivers. And, unfortunately, we do realize that there is stigma attached to many different labels, regardless of what they are, which is not a good thing. But ultimately, we feel that we all need to know ourselves, right? We need to know our strengths. We need to know our challenges, because if we know our challenges and what might be causing them, then we can do something about them. So most people do find learning about brain injury to actually be very empowering, because it helps to explain things. I'm sure Lauren can comment that people, who are experiencing persistent symptoms following a concussion or a brain injury, and they've never made that connection. We've had people say to us, I just thought I was going crazy, or I thought I was imagining things. And now I understand, oh no, that's actually real. I really am experiencing this, and this is why. It's not that I'm going crazy. And it can be, as I say, it can be empowering and relieving for people. But those are very important considerations. So this is the actual tool. As I say, it's the HELPS screening tool, and it will be distributed. Amber has it, but we'll make sure that all of you do have it. But this is essentially what it looks like. And I'm not sure whether you're going to be putting it online or whether you'll be filling it out through writing. But this is the first page. So the HELPS is our acronyms. And the H is, have you ever hit your head or been hit on the head? And again, I don't need to read through it. It's the fact that you don't need to have hit your head per se or been hit on the head necessarily. Anywhere, where you have fallen and your head has hit something or your head has moved. We talked about last time about violent shaking of the head, such as being shaken as a baby or a child. Have you ever been to an emergency room because of an injury to your head? The other thing that again, we know is, unfortunately, brain injuries are not necessarily picked up, particularly if there's an orthopedic injury. Sometimes people following an assault will go in, with a fractured cheekbone or a fall. They've maybe been hit in the face with something. And the idea of a brain injury isn't picked up on because they're looking at the orthopedic injuries, injuries to teeth, etc. So that part of the history is really important. This next point, did you ever lose consciousness? We spoke last time about the importance of the fact that not everyone will really completely lose consciousness. So it's also, have you ever gone through a period of feeling dazed and confused because of an injury to your head? So that's what we call an alteration of consciousness, even though the person didn't completely lose consciousness. The next one asks if the individual is experiencing any of these types of problems in their life since they hit their head. And these are, as you know now, symptoms or sequelae or outcomes from brain injury. Are they struggling with headaches? Do they experience any dizziness, anxiety, depression, difficulty with attention and memory, so the concentration and remembering? Are they experiencing any difficulties with reading, writing, calculating? I wish this asked about hearing, but I'm encouraging all of you to ask about hearing. Any difficulties in how you're able to solve problems since you hit your head? Has there been any change in your ability to function at school or on your job or work? Changes in relationships with others, poor judgment. So if you think back to those two cases that Lauren discussed, Patrick and Robert, they were experiencing all of these things, and it was pretty much immediate onset following their injury, and again, no one picked up. So the other, we talked about the fact that traumatic brain injury falls under acquired brain injury. So there are also illnesses that can cause a brain injury. It's not a traumatic, it's an acquired. Like for example, a brain tumor, meningitis, if someone's had a stroke or near drowning, heart attack, etc. So those are all the questions that we go through in terms of the help. So I'll just quickly go through that again. Have you ever hit your head or been hit on the head? Have you ever been seen in the emergency room because of an injury to your head? Ever lose consciousness or experience a period of being dazed and confused? So that's an alteration in consciousness, but not a complete loss, and that's the really key point. Any of these problems that the person might be experiencing, and or have they had a history of any significant sickness? And so this is how it is scored. It's considered positive for a possible TBI. This is not a diagnosis. And this is why, if they have not had a diagnosis, that we would encourage the client, with their agreement and support, to then go in and be referred to the inner city health team, where they can actually get the diagnosis. But the positive screen is an event that could have caused a brain injury. So yes to H, E, or S. Any period of loss of consciousness. It's interesting. You may find that people haven't lost consciousness, but they definitely remember that being sort of dazed and confused and memory difficulty right after. And then the presence of 2 or more chronic problems listed under the P. As I said, it's not a diagnosis. It is a screener. There's a big difference. And you of course, would want to explain that to your client as well. This is by no means that we're saying you have a brain injury. This means that you may have, and it's important that we get it looked at and to get whatever care you need. And then, of course, there could be some exceptions to the screening results. People may say no because they may have difficulty. They may not have memory for events that have happened for whatever reason. It could be a memory, or it could be a psychological block. And also think about, if they have altered behavioral and or cognitive functioning. So do we have any, before we move on, are there any questions or comments in terms of the screening? Okay, so what we'd like to do now is to do a small group activity because, as I said, we know that there are lots of issues that go along with the screening process. And we also recognize that when you have new clients coming in, you're asking lots of questions, you're screening for lots and lots, and you're getting lots of information. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. What I recall, in Madison, please correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe that Amber was saying that this should likely be administered maybe in your second or maybe even in your third session if you're meeting a new client, and probably not during the first, but by the third it should be done. So we also know that this is a time when there are many things going on in our community regarding race, regarding gender issues. People are struggling with many issues, and we want to think about that in terms of screening. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a small group activity, and we're going to think about the principles of cultural sensitivity and motivational interviewing to the screening process. And these are probably things that you may or may not be familiar with, but I'd like you to have an opportunity to discuss these things amongst yourself. And since this is a smaller group today, Madison, how many people do we have today?
We have 5.
5. Okay, I think we'll put you all in one group for for this first breakout. We are going to do one other breakout group later on, but we'll put you all together in this one, and then we'll maybe have smaller groups in the next time. So I want you to think about this screening, and I want you to discuss amongst yourselves why a client may choose not to disclose that they have history of a brain injury, and if so, how you can support them using motivational interview techniques. So for example, again, I would imagine that these are things that you're familiar with, but being able to express empathy and understanding through reflective listening. I understand this might be difficult for you. Develop a discrepancy between the client's goals or values and their current behavior. So this is an important one in motivational interviewing. For example, I know you're doing this early on in the intake process, so perhaps you may not be establishing things like, getting a job at this point, but perhaps you have done some goal setting, and maybe you know that your client wishes to get a job. So that's a really valuable goal. Maybe they want to become enrolled in a substance use program. Maybe they want to find stable housing. How could choosing not to disclose a brain injury impact your getting a job or achieving your goal of finding stable housing, getting on ODSP, et cetera? Because we know that there's challenges associated with the brain injury, and if you're unable to address those because you don't have a diagnosis, that could act as a barrier towards achieving your goal. So the aim of this screening is to try and get you some support. So those would be examples of where you could look at discrepancy between their goals and maybe a choice to not want to be screened or to not want to be referred on. The next would be, of course, adjusting to client resistance. Again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure you're all familiar with these techniques, and supporting self-efficacy and optimism. All right, so this is a really important quote. This is from a really fantastic paper from a study that was conducted in Australia, and they've really done. Australia is really a leader in terms of working with people in the justice system, and this was a qualitative study. A qualitative study is where essentially you ask people questions and they respond, and then we look at sort of themes and things that arise. But this name of this paper is called Enhancing the Rights and Well-Being of People with Acquired Brain Injuries in the Criminal Justice System. And what they did in this study was they interviewed judges, they interviewed lawyers, they interviewed court workers, they interviewed people with lived experience of brain injury in the criminal justice system. And then they summarized the findings and made a number of recommendations. And there are some really great quotes in here. And this was from one of the people that they interviewed. And this individual said, "I know people just look at me like I'm stupid sometimes because I don't absorb what they're saying sometimes. I get lost halfway through conversations, and I would be sitting there trying to think, catch on, what are we talking about? And then I just think that I look like an idiot again." And I think this is so true of the in-depth interviews that I've conducted with people with brain injury, not just those in the criminal justice system, but certainly those within the criminal justice system. And it's such an important contributor to their being marginalized and socially isolated is they feel that people perceive them as being stupid, when really it's just they have difficulty following quickly moving conversations, particularly when there's stressful environment and lots going on. So the responsibility lies on us, and it lies on the legal system to provide those accommodations. So again, you've identified some of the challenges that your clients experience. So we know that there's challenges associated with cognition, which is our thinking abilities, communication, emotion, and behavioral challenges. And I emphasized earlier that those behavioral challenges are not willful per se. They are because of those underlying cognitive challenges, emotional challenges, and communication challenges. And so these complicate management while the individual might be incarcerated. They certainly create barriers to successful community reintegration, and oftentimes they are the causative or contributing factor to the individual becoming involved in the justice system in the first place. So when we're talking about cognitive challenges, specifically we're referring to, these would probably be the main ones. So first of all, clients often have, with brain injury, often have difficulty paying attention. So particularly for long periods of time, and we talked about the issue of fatigue, poor sleep, if they're hungry, stress, all of those things, if they're experiencing pain. So just being able to pay attention is a challenge. If we can't pay attention, we certainly can't remember. And we know that there are lots of memory challenges. And Andrea, for your particular client, and you commented around the issues around the bail, that is such a huge one. We hear that so often, is that, you know, people are not able to meet the conditions of their bail. And it is not willful. It is that they literally do not have the skill. There's this difference between will and skill. Somebody may have every good intention in the world, but if they have memory problems, judgment problems, orientation problems, the skill will not be carried through. Being able to multitask, or, you know, manage all of the component parts to being able to do something like, for example, show up to a bail hearing. Being able to self-monitor when things break down. Often people don't have the insight or awareness, or if they do, they don't have the ability to stand back and try a different way. We see difficulties with planning and organizing. So if you remember, we talked about the executive functions and those 3 purple circles of keeping the goal in working memory, being able to inhibit impulsive behaviors or behaviors that might distract them from the goal, and then being flexible. So if I try one way and it doesn't work, I don't have, as someone with a brain injury, the ability to stand back and try something different. So we also see challenges in reasoning. You know, is that a good idea? Well, if so, well, why is it not a good idea? Anticipating consequences and you know, just reasoning through things. We talk about cognitive communication challenges, and this is a big word, but essentially it means difficulty with any aspect of communication. And this means listening, understanding, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking. You know, we use language to think. We have that voice in our head due to underlying cognitive impairments. So as you're sitting listening to me, and for those of you who were discussing and then sharing information, again, you had to be able to pay attention. You had to remember the goal of why you were in that breakout room. The goal was talking about screening and how that might impact your clients and what happens if you do find out they have a brain injury, how that changes things. So you were using all of those cognitive abilities and your reasoning skills, your planning, your problem solving in order to come back and then communicate back to the group. So those are things that we typically do automatically. We don't ever think about them. But for people with brain injury, every step is so much more effortful. So we see the impact of cognitive challenges on communication. We also see challenges with behavioral self-regulation, and that impacts the social communication. So again, if I don't have the ability to control my anger or not say, you know, the first thing that jumps into my head, I'm going to, you know, have difficulty in social situations. And social situations also involve work, school, court. By social, we mean any situation where there's another person. So Flora Matheson and I recently were involved in a previous study where I commented that I had the opportunity to interview a number of individuals with history of brain injury in the criminal justice system. And we also had them complete a formal communication questionnaire asking them about their communication experiences in very specific situations. And what was really interesting was that these were the things that they identified were particularly troublesome for them, that were really challenging. Attending to conversation, so they had a lot of difficulty paying attention in conversation. They had difficulty with what we refer to conversational fluency. And what that means is finding the words and organizing and expressing themselves in the way they mean. And Brianna, I think it was you who commented about your client who seemed, you were speaking to him all over the phone, and your comment was he was all over the place. And that is, again, it's very, very common. And what that likely was, and that's, again, another misconception that people might interpret that they're using substances, where really it's that they have difficulty finding the words, they have difficulty organizing what they want to say and planning it, and then they have difficulty expressing it in a way that is smooth and fluid. So it comes across as disjointed. They might jump all over the place, talk around in circles, and it can be really hard to follow them. And it can also be really hard to jump in. So that's a very common challenge. The next area where they had difficulty is in managing conversational interactions. So we need what we call metacognitive skills in order to be successful communicators. And metacognitive means we need to have some level of awareness of our own thinking and our own communication style. So that particular individual, like many individuals, is talking around in circles and rambling, or maybe interrupting, or not being able to get to the point. And they often don't recognize that. And particularly if you're on the phone and you can't see them, so they can't, they have difficulty reading faces anyway, but they can't pick up on the cues that you need to jump in and take some turns in conversation. So again, that's very common. And being able to manage impulsivity in conversation. So these were some areas that were really challenging for these individuals. And again, you can imagine what this looks like. Well, you don't need to imagine, because some of you have experienced it with your clients, what this looks like in the justice system, and also in terms of community reintegration. Now, the other area that we see, and again, some of you have already spoken to this, is emotional challenges. And we see a really wide range here. Often we see people who are more what we call labile. So they flip and flop, their emotions are right at the surface. They get angered easily, they get upset easily, irritable. Some of that is due to sleep deprivation or poor sleep as well. I mentioned that we also see on the opposite end, people who can come across as having a very flat affect and look very disengaged and bored and disinterested. And again, they're not doing that intentionally. That's the nature of their particular brain injury. What we also see, and this is very common, is difficulty with facial emotion recognition. People with brain injuries often don't look first to the eyes. There's been some interesting studies where they've actually had used a special tool where they look, where people scan when we're looking at people. And usually people look at somebody else's eyes first. And then they look at different parts of the faces, and we pull all that together and we create an internal representation of what that person might be feeling. Another thing is alexithymia, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about that because that's probably a term that is not familiar to you. Essentially what it means is lack of vocabulary to identify and express emotion, but there are also a few other things that go along with it. So the other thing is that we know that for many of the individuals that you work with, particularly those who come from socio-demographic background that may involve poverty, abuse, low educational achievement, early school leaving, etc., that they have issues with language and literacy. And there's substantial literature that shows that many people in the justice system have unidentified language difficulties and poor literacy. And when we talk about the term literacy, we're not just referring to the ability to read. It's that whole schema of, see, there I go, my hands, I'll stop, of having vocabulary, but also having enough vocabulary and reading skills to be able to learn new vocabulary through reading, whether it's even reading signs or reading newspapers or scrolling around on the internet or going into a new situation and being able to read between the lines and pick up new information. That's also literacy. And if you have low levels of language and poor vocabulary and poor reading, then you do not have that ability to increase literacy over time. So that's another barrier, particularly when you're looking at legal language, which is very complex. So essentially what we see here is a whole bunch of areas that interact. We have someone with a traumatic brain injury here in the middle. We know they have problems with communication. We know that they have problems with emotion. We know they have cognitive problems, and this all impacts on behavior, and everything interacts here. And it's very difficult and really shouldn't be looked at in isolation. We need to be looking at the big picture. Let me just take a look at the clock here. It's 2:39. I'm going to suggest that we actually take a break. Would this be a good time to take a break? Is there anybody who does not want to take a break? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, how about we take 12 minutes? Okay, all right, so welcome back everyone. And we were just starting to talk a little bit about emotional dysregulation and communication. And you know, we certainly are aware that this is a challenge for many of our clients. And we were talking a little bit about the concept of alexithymia. So individuals with emotional dysregulation and communication, you know, this has a significant impact on psychosocial functioning, relationships, community reintegration. And we know that it often leads to recidivism because if people have difficulty, as we were talking about, reading facial emotion and not recognizing when someone is giving clear signals that they're angry or they want you to back off, things can happen. So we also know, as I commented, that people with brain injury can have a lot of difficulty processing emotion, not even just reading faces, but just general emotion processing. And this is referred to as alexithymia, and A meaning lack of, and lexithymia, lexicon meaning words or vocabulary. So we know that it's present in anywhere from 30 to 60% of people with brain injury compared to 10% in a non-TBI population. And this is a term that you probably have not heard of before, but it's really becoming more on the radar as we learn more about brain injury. And again, particularly prevalent among those in the criminal justice system. So what it is, it's first of all, poor awareness for personal emotions. So not being able to pick up when a person might be feeling anxious or angry or stressed, as well as not picking up on the emotions of others. We give so many cues with our faces, with our body language, with our tone of voice about what we're feeling, and we don't necessarily use the words for that. And people with brain injuries really don't pick up on that at all. Reduced acknowledgement of physical sensations and associations with emotional response. So I had an interesting experience. I interviewed a gentleman for another research study that I was involved in who was just such a lovely individual. We ended up speaking for close to 3 hours, and he had a long history of numerous brain injuries and many associated complications and challenges. He was extremely intelligent and very articulate. And he shared that he has anxiety, but that for many, many years until he was working with a psychiatrist, he really had no idea what was going on. And he, through his work with the psychiatrist, started to learn that his increased heart rate, shortness of breath, rapid shallow breathing, feeling sweaty, increased heart rate, that those were actually signals to him from inside his body that he was experiencing a panic attack and going into a period of feeling very anxious. But he had not been able to make that connection before. And so that was really enlightening for him because he could then also start to recognize and then use means of calming himself. So we all, when we experience emotion, if we're stressed, we get an automatic, we tend to, I'm a real flusher, my cheeks get red, I'll get red, you know, across my neck if I'm upset, or if I'm really excited about something. You know, sometimes our speech rate will speed up, we can get sweaty palms. Again, those are all cues and signals from our central nervous system about what we're feeling. But people with alexithymia don't pick up on that. The other might be difficulty describing and or trouble distinguishing emotions. So anger versus being sad. And we certainly know that often when people are angry, there's underlying pain or contributing factors of sadness that may contribute to that. But they are different and they manifest differently. The other thing with people with alexithymia is that they tend to be very concrete. They really have difficulty getting into conversations of anything beyond concrete or superficial facts, rather than emotions or feelings or abstract concepts. We also see, along with alexithymia, is what we call a negative attribution. And this is really important because, again, it gets people into trouble. So these individuals tend to experience this negative attribution. So things are often misinterpreted with a negative intent. So you could even be trying to work with a client, trying to be helpful, but they think, you know, that there's some conspiracy or somebody's out to get them. And no matter what happens, that's the way things are interpreted. So this is often combined with behavioral dysregulation. So what we really mean is poor impulse control. So if you have somebody who's looking at someone and saying, you know, that guy's looking at me funny. Yes, I'm sure he is. I know he's thinking I look weird, or he's, you know, wants to steal something from me, and I have poor impulse control. You know, the end result is I'm going to haul off and I'm going to do something, and it's going to get me into trouble. So being able to work with and explain and support emotion recognition, distinguishing fact versus, you know, emotion, and learning how to pick up on signals in the body is really an important part of managing all of these things. And we'll, you know, I'm sure those of you that are working on anger management are familiar with these, and we're going to get into some more strategies too. So how does this all translate? Well, you've all experienced this with all of your clients. And I think, you know, one of the most important, I mean, there's so many takeaways that I hope you'll bring away from this, but I think one of the main takeaways is that you should essentially assume from what we know about the statistics and the prevalence, you should assume that your clients have a brain injury unless you hear otherwise, and just try to keep that into consideration in all of your interactions with them. So what happens is we have someone with a brain injury, they have communication challenges, they have cognitive challenges, and it infects their behavior. How does this translate in the criminal justice system? Well, having a memory impairment, as well as aggression, anger, impulsivity, irritability, this gets people into trouble in the corrections world. And this is work by Dr. Wayne Gordon, who's a neuropsychologist in the US, who has spent and devoted a good chunk of his career in supporting individuals in the justice system. So this is a study here, the quote below, from the US, where again, they were looking at prevalence of brain injury among individuals who were actually in prisons and jails. And what she found is that not only were they reporting brain injury after the fact, like some of the clients that you've spoken about, but they were not making the connection. They were not aware that a single event or a series of them could be making it harder for them to earn a ticket out of jail. Those were, I guess, someone's exact words, or avoid being sent back into the future in the future. So it's so important having that knowledge about the brain injury, and thinking back to Lauren speaking about the case of Patrick, the gentleman who, as part of his parole conditions, or possibly it was probation, I want to make sure I get that correctly, that he had some education about brain injury so that he could actually understand what had happened to him and to pick up on some of the signs, and then he could employ some strategies and with the support of others and environmental modifications to manage that. Because once we have the awareness, then we can develop self-advocacy, and you as frontline staff can support that advocacy as well. But as we know, this is what it looks like. I'm having difficulty remembering. I maybe labile, and it comes across that they're being non-compliant, that they're being rude, that they're defiant, that they have poor motivation, they're disengaged, and they're aggressive. And those are the labels that get attached when really it's because of underlying issues resulting from the brain injury. So these were some comments from that same study where the individual with lived experience commented about being perceived as stupid, or they were feeling stupid. These were some of the comments from justice personnel that they interviewed. And this is a pretty recent study from 2018. Again, it's from Australia. One court staff said, I would say that there isn't enough education in the community about what an ABI is. So that's the acquired brain injury, but we're speaking about all of it here. And the effects of brain injury on a person's personality, behavior, and so forth. I think more emphasis needs to be put on education for magistrates, which is of course the British Australian term for judges, legal aid, and so forth, and security guards. So to that end, I also wanted to share that as part of our work, we're also doing, not this specific grant, but I'm involved in another grant where we've been doing training with probation and parole officers. Melissa Vigar and I from the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, we commented that we've been doing some training with Toronto Police. So we are really trying to make everyone across the justice system aware of brain injury so that it can be dealt with for what it is, as a chronic health condition. The next comment here is actually from a judge. I think it is difficult with an ABI because it is so difficult to diagnose. And that's also interesting because we don't want judges diagnosing brain injury. We don't want anybody diagnosing brain injury except for a medical health professional, but we want them to recognize that it is likely a brain injury, or that they should make sure that the individual is given the opportunity to have a brain injury. I mean, some people wouldn't even know that they had an ABI, which is true. Again, all the stats show that oftentimes individuals really are not even aware. Sometimes there's also the overlay of all the drug and alcohol and or mental health issues that can cover up a lot of things. Yes, absolutely. We're looking at, the whole trifecta here. We're looking at brain injury, mental health, and substance use often in your clients. And until you start dealing with that, you don't realize that you have the underlying issue. So yes, so these are challenging individuals. I just thought you would find those comments interesting. So what can you do about it? Strategies to facilitate communication. So it was helpful for me to hear that you are doing work on the phone with your clients right now. And I'm assuming if you're doing work on the phone that you don't see them. Is that correct? Are the majority of your appointments taking place on the phone right now? So I'm going to assume that's a yes. So, and even if it's not, even if you're having the opportunity to see them on a screen, I would suggest that you always ask your client, do you have any difficulties with hearing or understanding that you'd like me to know about? So start off right there, and that's okay. That's perfectly safe, and that how can I help you? Ask them what they need from you to make communication successful. If you are working with clients in person, we know that many people with brain injuries, particularly with persistent concussion symptoms, are really distracted by all sensation is overwhelming. So bright lights can give them a headache. You remember Alexander when he was talking about the eye care kit, and he was talking about going into court and how putting on the sunglasses was really helpful for him. So ask them, are the lights bothering you? Particularly if you're in fluorescent lights, I know I'm someone who's really sensitive to fluorescent lights. I find them exhausting by the end of the day. The other is speak a bit more slowly than you might normally. And this is a challenging thing. This is, again, one of the reasons that we have you at least look at the communication self-assessment checklist. Often, and especially in our society, we do everything fast, right? We have so many things we have to get through in the day, and we speak quickly. But if we just slow down a little bit, we don't need to come across as being rude or patronizing. I know some people worry about that, but you don't have to. Just catch yourself, think about, am I taking a breath? And just slow down. And if you can slow down the pace a little bit and use shorter sentences, you'll find that people are able to understand much, much better. That's something that does take practice, though. As I mentioned, ask the person if they have any challenges with either hearing and or comprehension. If they have issues with hearing, ask if one ear is better than the other. We know that hits to the side of the head, especially repeat, can cause hearing loss. So if someone says my right ear is better than my left ear, then okay, let's turn your head so that I'm speaking to your right ear. Those little things can make such a difference. So pausing in between and giving the individual time to process information. I can't stress enough how important that is. So you're talking about the upcoming bail hearing and what are the strategies we need to put in place for you to get there. You talk about that and then you pause. And you give them time, and then you say, okay, you let me know, is that okay? Shall we continue? Let them cue you, because that's also important for them too. It's that self-advocacy thing, is learning to be able to say to someone, I need you to slow down, or, can you just give me a minute to process that? Another thing is supporting your clients by reviewing any new vocabulary, especially as it pertains to their legal case. Don't assume that they know the legal terminology. Legal language is so incredibly complex. And if you recall, when Melissa showed you on the Justice ABI website, they have a whole list of vocabulary there with definitions. And I have another one of those here for you too. So this was actually developed by a lovely colleague of mine in the United Kingdom. Her name is Gemma Creek, and she works with the youth offending team. And so she also put this together. So things like adjourn, alleged, breach, co-defendant, comply. Those are all very complicated words that likely someone, unless they've been, that's that literacy thing, unless they've been exposed to them beforehand, they probably have no idea what those words mean. And if you're in a courtroom and you're responding to things and agreeing to things, you need to understand the vocabulary. So you might want to sit down and review what might happen and what is any new vocabulary. So general strategies. So the most important thing, as I said, start off by asking, is there anything that I can do to help you? Do you have any challenges with hearing, any challenges with understanding? Let them know they're in a safe space and they can ask you to repeat or clarify at any time. I always try to normalize brain injury with the fact that, everybody has something. You've heard me say that several times during the training. I wear glasses when I'm sitting in front of a screen. I wear glasses for distance. I'm wearing my, my AirPods here so that I can hear you better. Everybody has something that they're dealing with. It's no big deal. You're there to help them. You are working collaboratively. It's a safe space. Whatever they need from you is fine. The other thing is provide a brief summary of the main points after each section of the conversation. So you remember at the beginning of our session, I went over a brief summary of what we learned in the first session. And that's how we all learn, right? It's really important. And particularly if someone is having attention problems or memory, you're coming maybe to the end of a session or you're changing topics. You say, okay, before we move on, let's just go over the main points that we talked about. And then you just maybe repeat those main points. Then you can say, you know, can you share with me what we talked about, or why don't you explain to me what you understand? Don't ask them, do you understand? That is so common in the legal system, where particularly a judge or a police officer will say to an individual, and do you understand, in a very stern voice? And the person nods and says, yes, I do. When in fact, a lot of the time they may in fact not understand. And again, I don't mean in any way to be disrespectful of judges or police officers. I mean, they're using terminology and statements that they are required to use under the law, and they are also required to use that statement, do you understand? But we are suggesting and asking that the question be rephrased to tell me what you understand, or tell me what you understood from our conversation, because you'll see that a lot of the times there might be gaps in understanding. Write some notes. If you're in a meeting, you know, write some notes or type them out on your laptop and then email to them to the client so that they have some kind of a record to look back on, especially if they have memory challenges or difficulty picking up on all the details. That's extremely helpful. Setting up realistic reminder strategies. All of the tools that Melissa shared on the legal website are so helpful. You know, how to set up a Google Drive, how to do reminders. I have an app on my phone here that's called Cue Card. Let me just see if I can find it here. So it's called Cue Card. It's probably not showing up very well. Yeah, it actually was originally free. It's now $4.99, and then you have it forever. But Cue Card was actually developed by an individual with brain injury. He's a survivor, and he was a computer programmer. And it's a means of queuing steps and reminders. It's a really useful app. And because it was designed by a survivor, it's very user-friendly. So it's literally called Cue, as in letter Q, and then Card. So that's a great app. Or, you know, there's other reminders that you can put into the individual's phone. So if they have a bail hearing and you know that's likely to be a challenge for the person, help them to put it in their calendar, set up some kind of a notification system. And if you're able to call them in advance, as well as having a plan to how to get there, that's extremely helpful. So another thing that's really important is advocacy. So as always, we want to support our clients and ourselves to be advocates for ourselves and what we need. So support and teach your clients that they can and they should use the following phrases when they're interacting with legal personnel and authority figures. This is literally the Accessible Canada Act, the Ontarians Ontarians Accessible with Disabilities Act, OAODO, I forget the exact acronym. This is under the law that people have a right to be able to communicate and to be able to understand what's being said to them. So as a result, it is their legal right to say, I have a communication and processing difficulty and I need you to slow down, please. There is on the OBIA website, as well as on the Justice ABI website, a brain injury identification card. And we are trying to make that so that it is actually a type of identity that is registered, so that if someone shows that to a police officer or someone in a court or anyone, that it also shows I have a brain injury and this is what I need from you. Another one, I don't understand the word X. Okay, I don't understand that word. Could you please use it in a sentence to give me an example of what it means? Everyone is perfectly entitled to be asking these questions. I need you to slow down so I can follow what you're saying. I don't understand that word. Could you explain it again or use it in a sentence? I need extra time. Often people are slow and hesitant in their communication. So I need time to find the words and say what I need to say. And again, emphasize that it is their legal right to be able to say this, or to say, I have memory problems. Could you please write down the key points of our conversation for me to take away? Those are all strategies and advocacy points that we want to encourage people to use. So this is a really great resource. Headway.org.uk is the British Brain Injury Association, and they have a lot of fantastic resources. Again, we will be sending out this link and this website and multiple links and websites, but I highly encourage you to take a look. There's a lot of things that can be downloaded and given to clients, or you can walk through things with clients, or they can help you to understand as well. So there is a lot of great information on cognitive communication difficulties, which we've been talking about. All right, so we are going to move on now, and we're going to talk about emotion regulation and anger management. We understand that especially now during COVID, when people are really experiencing a lot of stress, that a number of your clients have really been struggling with emotion regulation and anger management. So we've tried to put together a toolkit for you of some strategies and programs that you can use to support your clients. And I know that a number of you do work in the area of anger management. So we try to use a variety of methods because not necessarily one is the be all and end all. And so I think that putting all of these things together can be really helpful, so that you're building a whole package. And I'm going to talk to you about each one of these. So psychoeducational information and skill building exercises, I'll explain, as we go. I'm going to walk through each of these. Teaching emotional vocabulary, labeling and differentiating self and emotions, interoceptive awareness. What that means is, what does this feel like in my body? You remember back the gentleman that I spoke about, who it was new information to him that he was struggling with anxiety, and that the symptoms he was experiencing of increased heart rate and shortness of breath were actually a manifestation of his anxiety. And when he was able to put those two together, that was really empowering to him. The other is distinguishing emotions from thoughts, actions, and sensations. Sometimes all of this information is just a big jumble, and people are just really, experiencing heightened stress, and it's difficult to pick out, well, is this real? Or am I experiencing a negative attribution that isn't real? Is this a big deal? Is this a little deal? So I'm going to share with you some work by a number of wonderful individuals, and hopefully you can find some tools and tricks and toolkits that might be helpful for your clients. So the first one is by a former mentor and colleague and dear friend of mine, Dr. Mark Ilvasacker, who passed away about 8 years ago from cancer. And Mark Ilvasacker and his colleague Tim Feeney, who is still alive and well and working in the United States, really were, I think, the grandfathers of providing really functional, hands-on supports for people with brain injuries. And I'm going to share with you some websites where there's repositories of all his work, and all of his books are just fantastic. But this first one is called Big Deal, Little Deal. So we know that emotional dysregulation is often accompanied by the feeling that everything is a big deal. And we often feel like that too. There are days when, we're tired and we're being hit by all kinds of stuff, and like everything is a big deal. It's just, oh, I can't handle anymore. So it's really important to work with clients and ourselves to identify, well, what is a big deal? Is it really a big deal? And if so, how do I know it's a big deal? How would I know if it's a little deal? And there's scripts that we can use. So what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to use a method of positive communication to retrain a verbal, through talking, means of regaining control rather than through violence. Because we as a society, we react, we lash out, we get aggressive, And we're aiming to build capacity through the use of nonviolent language. So if you have a client where it seems like there's things going on, they're upset, ask them, what's going on with you? And if they're able to articulate it, or you're able to at least pick out some of it, this is such a great question. How can we find another way to get these results? How can we find another way to navigate these feelings and ask for collaboration? So the ask for collaboration is meaning you're asking them in a way that you're in there with them. How can we rather than how can you? Because just knowing that we have some moral support to walk through things can make such an enormous difference. The other thing is we need to be clear on what is non-negotiable and why. So for example, violence is not an option. If you're in the courtroom or you're in my office or we're working together or whatever, this is not negotiable. It's a health and safety issue. So how can we navigate other options? And that is such a powerful sentence. I acknowledge that you are angry or you're feeling X, Y, and Z. How can we navigate some other options to respond? As I mentioned already, using phrases like, let's do this together, is a positive, collaborative approach to managing extreme emotions and challenges. It's providing that moral support and building relationships. We don't want to be blaming or fixing, and I'm not saying that any of you do that, but it's really interesting when you look at some ways that people do, and sometimes caregivers end up working with loved ones with brain injury. They start using testing questions. Well, what did we do? What did we remember? Can you tell me about this? It's like, well, the person doesn't know. They don't remember. So stop asking me because that's just going to get me annoyed. And again, it makes me feel stupid that I can't remember. So that is not helpful. And we also don't want to use punitive, blaming language. So it's like, let's do this together. Let's figure this out. There's always a way if we have more than one head. So, of course, we know that negative communication style, which is often punitive or blaming, that doesn't promote self-learning or self-growth. So, and those are examples are the testing questions or the judgments. Well, you should be able to remember that, or of course you should have been able to get to your bail hearing. What's the matter with you? The aim is to promote learning and self-growth, and through that we develop advocacy. So this is another method of walking through problem solving. And this again is from Mark Ilvasaker's work. And so this is a fantastic website. Again, I'm going to send it out to you. So if we have a problem, the first thing is to be able to actually identify and label the problem, because sometimes that's difficult for people if they're particularly overwhelmed. So see if you together with the individual can identify or label the issue, and then validate. This seems to be a problem. This is kind of scary, or this is a big deal. I think this might be hard for you. Being able to validate that something is challenging is again, can be very empowering for someone. Then you want to state the reason. This can be a problem. This can be scary because it's a big deal because, and then actually identify, what is the issue that's going on here. And I am a strong believer in literally using notes and writing these down, using these headings and writing it down. Because when people can see things in a concrete way, again, sometimes it takes the worry or the scariness away. So once we've identified the problem or labeled it, then we've stated why it might be a challenge. What might the consequences be? What might this mean for the individual? Why might it be hard for the individual? Then offer a strategy. Well, what can we do, or what can you do, that can help? And let's brainstorm together. And then you offer some general reassurance. Great, there's always something that works, isn't it? Or you can say things like, okay, well, let's try this, and if it doesn't work, let's come up with another plan. So always using we language and validating and supportive. Now, the next thing is nonviolent communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Are any of you familiar with Marshall Rosenberg's work? So I'm going to show you, this is actually my copy of this particular book here. And every training that I do, I emphasize what a valuable methodology this is. I use it in my private practice. I use it in my personal life. I use it in all of my training. And Marshall Rosenberg passed away a few years ago. He was a psychologist who developed this program, and it has been implemented literally all over the world in high-level negotiations, in political negotiations, in marital conflict, among individuals in the justice system. Dr. Rosenberg went in and worked with individuals in the justice system to teach them nonviolent communication. And there is a whole website and trainers all across the world of people who use this method. So I want to walk you through some of the principles, and we're going to share a little bit of a video about it because I think you'll find it very helpful. So what exactly is violent communication? In our society, a lot of the communication that we use is in fact violent. It causes harm and it hurts people. We judge people, there's bullying, there's racism, we blame, we point fingers, we discriminate, we speak, but we don't really ever listen. We don't listen deeply to what the other person is trying to tell us. We criticize or we call names. We react rather than responding. We get defensive rather than, really listening and saying, okay, I hear you, let's see if we can work this out. So everything that judges good, bad, what's right, wrong with people, that, according to Dr. Rosenberg, could indeed be called violent communication. So nonviolent communication is an integration of four things. And the first is consciousness. So actually being aware, because so often we don't realize what we're saying. We just blurt out, we just react to whatever comes across our path. And we're all guilty of that at times. So it is a set of principles that support living a life of compassion, collaboration, courage, and authentic communication. Language. Understand how words contribute to connection or distance. We are social beings and we use communication to create those social bonds. That is the primary way. And language can be nonverbal as well, but our communication is the underlying premise of our social bonds as human beings. Communication, knowing how to ask for what you want, how to hear others even when there's a disagreement, and how to move forward towards solutions that work for everyone. And then finally, means of influence. We want to be able to share power with others rather than using power over others. And violent communication is using power over another person. So, these are just some parameters of the nonviolent communication. I urge you to go onto the website and take a look. Okay, so this is how we apply the process. So the first is we stop and we breathe. And how many times do we need to be reminded to do that in our day? And then the second thing is to identify the judgmental thought and how that's making us feel. So the next step then is connect with or identify what is the unmet need behind this feeling. When I make that judgment of another person, what am I needing and not getting? Is it respect? Is it understanding? I feel angry because I'm sad, I'm hurt. Like what is the unmet need that is behind? And this is really, really critical here, because often we can make the connection between some sort of judgmental thought and we make the connection between how that makes us feel, but we don't do this inner step here. And this is really, I think, one of the tenets of nonviolent communication. Then we want to be able to express our feelings and unmet needs. And then finally, we ask for an action, but we ask as a request. We don't tell, we don't state you need to do or you must do. It's would you be willing to? So I'm going to show you a little bit more about this. We're actually going to do a case study. So this is a gentleman by the name of Isaiah, and that's not his real name. And he lives in a John Howard Society of Toronto congregate housing situation. So Isaiah has a brain injury. He is experiencing heightened emotion. He has poor impulse control. He becomes angry and irritated easily, and he comes to vent with staff regularly. So he's all the time, he's coming down to the office and he's got stuff going on and he really needs to talk about it. So recently, another tenant took some of his milk from the fridge and he was angry. He was rightfully angry and he became volatile and he came to the staff member. And to demonstrate his anger, he poured milk all over the staff member's desk. So this particular staff member is highly experienced and they're very calm, but this is really challenging behavior and you can't have people pouring milk all over your desk. So he needed to find a way to manage this. So this is the situation. So first of all, you speak with empathy and you speak with honesty. So you start with an observation. I hear, I see that I hear you say, I see you are about to pour milk on my desk, or I see you poured milk on my desk. You feel. Now, what you might also want to do, I know there's different views on this, and in the last training, I really like, I think it was Sarah who does a lot of your anger management, and she was suggesting, and I agree with this, that rather than saying you feel, do you feel, or I think you might feel, because again, we don't want to tell people what they're feeling, but you might be feeling angry, you might be feeling whatever, and you are wanting, like what are your needs that are underlying this anger? And what are the requests? What would you like me to, or would you be willing to? So what is exactly that you want out of this scenario? What we're trying to get at in this particular situation might be how the individual is feeling about pouring the milk, but also how the person is feeling about the fact that this is a consequence, or they're responding to or reacting to the other person taking their milk. And then, but the important thing here too is really to identify the need. And so I appreciate in your conversation the way that you handled it, and diffusing and taking the individual into the other room and really giving them a time to share and talk about how they're feeling, which is really, really important. But we also really want to suggest, again, these are all tricks and tools that you can try or not. You have to find what works for you and your clients. But the idea of identifying a need, and that an unmet need is driving that emotion. So in this particular individual's case for Isaiah, well, he needs to feel safe. Like, this is where he lives. He's in a congregate living situation, and we need to feel safe in our home. We need to feel that our property and our privacy are being respected. So his need for safety and his need for privacy and respect were not being met by this other individual. And that what is we assume, I mean, I could be wrong, but likely driving this immediate reaction. So then, exactly what you suggested, would you like me to help you deal with this? Or would you be willing to sit and talk about this and see if we can find a solution? So then you can potentially go in and brainstorm some ideas. So if you are in a position to try and add in principle number 3, I think, again, it really helps with self-advocacy, because a lot of people are, regardless of our situation, we don't necessarily really are in touch with what exactly it is that we need. And I think that when we can get in touch with it, I think we're more able to respond in a different manner. Or to identify, then coming back to the other individual that took the milk, I need to feel safe, and I need to feel respected in my home. So what would you be willing to? So the other person can understand where they're coming from. So once you have that, you've applied your nonviolent communication questions or approach. Then another way is to sit down and use goal, obstacle, plan, do, review. And you do this in a way, when I first show it, I hope that no one sort of finds this, you know, patronizing. It in no way is meant to do this. I actually do this when I'm setting out to do something. I identify what my goal is. I think about, you know, what might be the barriers, and I come up with a plan, and then I review it after. I did this with my kids when they were growing up. I do this with my students, and I'm waving my hand here to emphasize the importance. So this was also developed by Mark Ilvasacker, and it's pretty much used everywhere now. So this individual, Isaiah, has a goal that you might be working with him. Now, his goal is he wants to make sure his food is safe from the other tenants. So what are some obstacles? What could be some barriers to this being a realistic goal? Well, it may be that the other tenant might also have poor impulse control. They might also not understand, you know, the consequences of their behavior. It might be that the client has limited finances, both of them, to, you know, maybe you want the person to replace the milk, but maybe the other person has limited finances and is not in a position to do that. So you come up with a plan, and here are some possible options. So you want to come up with a couple of options. Well, maybe there's individual lock boxes in the fridge so that each person has their food that's locked up. Maybe we look to see how much a small fridge costs to put in Isaiah's own room. That may not be possible for a number of reasons. We may want to talk collaboratively with the other tenant, the client and staff member, to see how it can be handled. Maybe we want to explore, you know, the other tenant's needs or unmet needs and feelings about what happened. So this is a really nice way to help break down problems into identifiable steps. If you remember, we were talking about labeling the problem, identifying the feelings behind the problem, identifying using a collaborative approach, and identifying solutions. And then finally, you want to review afterwards. Okay, well, you know, did this work? How is this helpful? So I find this a really, really useful tool, particularly with people that have any cognitive challenges. And even if they don't, it's breaking everything down into steps. So then we go, well, did this work? If it did work, why did it work? Was this easy or hard? And this is also important too, because often people may misinterpret how difficult something might be and get overwhelmed, or they may underestimate the difficulty of something. So again, it's that metacognitive self-awareness. If it was hard, what is it that we need to practice? If it didn't work, what happened? Could we try a different option? If this did work, well, how did this feel? So hopefully, you know, the individual is going to say, or, you know, somehow communicate to you that that was pretty empowering and pretty satisfying, that I had a goal, we were able to work through it, and we found a successful option. So the next thing here, I'm cognizant of time, is teaching emotion vocabulary. So this is really important, particularly when we come from a lot of our cultural background. We're not taught to express emotions. A lot of us come from families where we don't use emotion words. And of course, there can often be cultural backgrounds, or for whatever, that, you know, people just do not use those words. And literally in this book, I've just taken, they have pages and pages. And, you know, how do we feel when our needs are not being met? And they go through the whole alphabet, and I've just given you a few here. But this is really helpful for, you know, again, to help people get in touch with and understand the range of emotions that we feel. Because often it's, I'm angry or I'm happy. And, you know, people don't really understand kind of the in-between. And again, it's very empowering. How do we feel when our needs are being met? Try to use those and use those words with your clients. So we really just have a few minutes left here, but I wanted to touch on the issue of mindfulness meditation. I don't know if any of you have used this with any of your clients, but it really has been found to be very, very successful with people with brain injuries. And it is also helpful from the perspective of attentional control, as well as dealing with emotions. And of course, it is something that needs to be practiced. I'm not going to get into the mechanism of this. You will have access to these slides, to a package after the fact. but it really is the breathing through mindfulness, and it can actually cause changes in the brain in terms of improving awareness, focused attention, and being able to calm ourselves. So we obviously took our break earlier. This is a great video here. I'm not going to play it. It's just 5 minutes, but it's a freely available video. It's from the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, has a mindfulness awareness research center, and they have some free mindfulness meditations. And this one is literally, it's 5 minutes. It's a breathing meditation. You can use it with or without the video. I actually love it. I do this throughout the day periodically. When I teach classes at U of T and McMaster online, we do this at the end of the class, or if the classes are needing a break. I think if you were able to have Isaiah come in, go through that, and then, or even before that, to sit down and listen to this, and then try to deal with the issue, that might be helpful. There is another really wonderful program called Love Your Brain Yoga. This is a program that was designed specifically for people with brain injuries. It was developed by someone who has a severe brain injury, who was a former Olympic athlete. He and his brother developed this program. The reason that I'm sharing it with you is not only is it a wonderful program, but it's freely available online right now. It's at loveyourbrain.com. And there are two programs. There's one where they just have the meditation and discussion, and then another one where there's an actual yogic component to it. So it's very valuable for clients. This is another great device that you can purchase at Best Buy. It may be something that Amber might want to consider buying. They're about $250. It's a biofeedback device that really helps with training mindfulness. And the person puts it on, and if they're in a state of agitation, they actually hear a thunderstorm. And with time, they follow mindfulness meditations that are delivered through the actual Muse device. And when they reach a state of calm, they hear birds chirping or a soft rainfall. So it's, again, there's been a lot of research to actually show from a neuroscience perspective that it works, and it's also been found to be very useful with depression. The last is what we refer to as communication partner training. And essentially that's what I've been talking to you about. I've been trying to give you strategies and tips so that you can modify the way that you communicate with your clients to facilitate a positive outcome. And there's been an increasing body of research, and this website here from the University of Sydney in Australia, they have a number of videos and worksheets, ways that you can, strategies that you can use, and actual things that you can fill in to help work with your clients. And again, we'll be sending all of these resources to you. This is another great one from the UK. I suggested that you look on their website. They actually have a really great booklet that you can download in terms of managing anger after brain injury. And then finally, as we wrap up here, I just wanted to again thank you so very much for participating, and just to remind you, that we're thinking of you as well. And that's, partly why we wanted to do this training, is we know that the work you do it's hard work. It's the work we all do is really challenging. And you are acting as caregivers in a lot of ways. And so there's a lot of burden, particularly in this time with COVID and working from home and isolated and using phones. So we encourage you to try and take care of yourselves and take care of each other as well. And when you need help, reach out. That's why we're here. That's why we put this network together. And so we really hope that this will enable you to enable your clients to have better outcomes and be more successful. So thank you.